So today we're going to talk about subject recruitment, proactive project plans, and issue management. The objectives are up here on the screen. We're going to explore updates on clinical trial participant recruitment worldwide. We're going to discuss an overview of participant recruitment practices, including the use of social media, examine keys to success, systemic practice approaches to recruitment in clinical trials, employ pre-screen practices to improve screening successes, examine the consenting process in regard to subject recruitment and retention, determine approaches to retain quality subjects to support data integrity, and finally, evaluate efforts, the recruitment report card. So what I want you to do is just go ahead and chat in the panel. I know that you've got it because you just sent me a message. What are some challenges we are facing in recruitment? And by the way, while you're doing that, you can chat in what your current role is. Okay, so the challenges, diversity, timelines, budget. Okay, great. These are the usual buckets that we find. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at the state of the industry currently regarding recruitment in particular. Okay, so again, we're always striving to improve recruitment. Now, I've had several decades in clinical research, and that's always been the issue in terms of getting the recruitment, getting the subjects in faster, getting them in and making sure they're appropriate for the study. And again, there is that focus on improving recruitment across the board. We have the clinical trials that are getting more and more complex, and now we're dealing with other things such as remote situations and decentralized trials. So a lot of this comes into play now as well. How do we manage our trials? Okay, so regulatory authorities, on average, are requiring an increase in the number of human participants per trial. And participants are more aware of treatment options. Again, people are, especially if they're in some critical diseases, they are looking into things online, they're educating themselves about their disease and asking questions about potential treatments. Now, the data we have, I don't have any more recent data from Tufts, but in 2017, approximately only 10% of all sites meet their enrollment marks. And I suspect it's not too much different today. And the longer we go, or the further out the site goes without enrollment, the less likely they are to enroll. So it's important to kind of make sure that we're selecting our study sites appropriately, making sure there's some thoughtful consideration before an investigator takes on a study, that they do have the potential to enroll. Of course, we know that subjects may be perfect fit for a study, but still not choose to go into a study. So again, having a good, robust database in terms of who might be qualified, and looking in particular with our study protocol as to who might fit with the inclusion-exclusion criteria we are given. We see also that most enrollment targets are either not met or delayed. We know a lot of trials end up extending their time period. We have a projected end of study period where we think that we're going to be concluded, and we have to extend that frequently because we do not have the enrollment. So this is, if you look at that time cover page, that's from quite a while ago, but that is still the way a lot of people think, that you're a human guinea pig, and they're very reluctant to go into a clinical trial. Now, we just had Clinical Trials Day just 2 days ago to increase awareness about clinical trials, educate the public of what they are. So what are some other complications that affect successful recruitment? Again, not having enough budget for it, not having enough budget to pay our sites or the sites, taking on a study and then finding out that, this is not really covering all their expenses. And so they slow down. They're not getting the appropriate number of staffing. They're not looking at the appropriate number of potential participants because they don't have the time to invest in really doing that kind of work. So poor budgets can come into play both from the sponsor and the site side. And then retaining qualified subjects. That's just as important as recruiting them. We can recruit the full number that we need, but if they don't stay in the study, it's not going to be really very valuable in terms of the data that we're going to be able to retrieve from that. So again, we want to make sure that our subjects truly understand what they are taking on when they go into a study, and they have the full intention to carry through. No one is forced to carry through, of course. And if there are certain adverse events that prevent them from continuing, of course, it's always patient safety first. But we do want to make sure that they understand everything and that they're not dropping out because, we didn't realize that we needed to come so frequently, or we didn't realize that we needed to do, X amount of tests. So we do want to make sure that they are fully aware and educated in terms of what the expectation is, so that we do retain them and not lose them for those particular reasons. There can be also some sales relationships between referring physicians and research centers. Those research investigators who are depending on some of their colleagues to refer patients to them, sometimes that doesn't work out so well. They think that that would be fine, and it turns out that either sometimes physicians don't want to refer patients because they feel they may lose them, or they just don't have the time to really screen to see that they might be an eligible participant. There are also cultural barriers and global differences. We do know that there are some cultural issues where we have a certain fear of clinical research, and sometimes that's based in fact. We do know that, with the past research, in terms of the African American population, there is a lot of hesitation about participating in a trial, looking at past history and past abuses. And then we have media impact. We don't usually hear about the good things that come out of clinical research, but we certainly hear about the bad things, and this cover on time is a prime example of what the public might see more frequently than anything good coming out of clinical research. All right, and then we have consumers' privacy fears. 1 in 6 Americans withdraw from full participation in their own care because of fears that their information will be used without their knowledge or permission. And we do have a lot of issues around privacy. In the U.S., we do have HIPAA statements that we have folks sign. But we do know that we have data breaches, and there's just, constant privacy breaches across the board. So people are a little fearful that their medical records will become exposed, and sometimes that is a reason for people withdrawing from a study. So looking at this, which came out of a Tufts study, which was about 12 years ago, but still, I think, relevant, because our numbers, unfortunately, have not changed too much. 28% of engaged investigative sites are new relationships with no prior history or familiarity of working with a sponsor or a CRO. The overall site initiation cycle time in the past has been about 9 weeks, shorter for repeat or familiar sites compared to new sites. So once you know what you're doing, you can get things up and running a little more quickly than someone who is brand new, obviously. 30 to 40% of sponsors and CROs report that they are somewhat or completely unsatisfied with their site initiation processes. Okay, and that comes out of another Tufts study. So again, we can see here that, most sites, a good third to a little bit over a third, under enroll. And there is a certain percentage, 10 to maybe 15% of sites that don't enroll anyone at all. And so after several months or even a couple months, frequently what is being written into some of these contracts, if there's no enrollment, the study would be pulled from that site. But that's a lot of wasted time, effort, money. So we want to make sure that we are recruiting our sites in a fashion that they will produce and that we have some assurances, no 100% guarantees, but some assurances that they will perform. So this trend should look familiar to you. Okay, we have the enrollment curve. We have the actual versus the expected. We think the expected here is going to be this darker blue-green line going up here. We think the enrollment's going to go this way. And in reality, what's happening is more like this. So at month 7, we thought we were going to be almost at our goal. And at month 7, we look like we're not even at halfway towards our goal. And why is that? So again, we're going to look at some of the steps that we can use to kind of maybe make that chart look a little bit more the way we'd like to see it. Now, this is something I was just at a conference and just saw this presented it came out of the Tufts Center again. And so here what we see here, Ken Getz actually was the speaker, and he presented this information. I thought it was kind of interesting to look at considering the climate that we're in right now. So we have here the ongoing and recent events of what's happening in clinical research in general, and the actual and expected responses. So we see that we have targeted areas of government scrutiny, and DEI is under, I want to say, scrutiny is a good word to use. And you said diversity was one of the challenges you had. So we have to now look at ways that we can kind of address that. Can we still address diversity without really almost using the word? Federal funding cuts and NIH overhead rate caps, that really kind of ties hands in terms of what we'd like to do and some of the bells and whistles we'd like to put into our research if we don't have all the funding for it. And sometimes losing personnel. We do know some especially academic sites that have some funding are losing that funding and then losing personnel, obviously. And then federal health services staffing reductions, increased trade regulations and tariffs, and drug pricing pressures. So this is kind of what's in the recent arena right now. Now, actual and expected responses here, we would like some tighter budgets and an increase in select development costs. And project delays, of course, are what's happening, and longer decision cycles. There have been some studies put on hold because we just don't know what direction things are going in and how much funding will be pulled back. More limited interaction with government representatives and increased private sector involvement. And there's unprecedented pressure on academic research institutions, as I mentioned, many of them losing very substantial grants and hence losing personnel along with the funding, obviously, from those grants. Global isolation and alienation, and a volatile environment for emerging and small private sector companies. And then there's weaker health services job market. So again, this is I just wanted to put this slide in here because it is very current and does have an impact on how we are going to be doing business with our sites and how sites will be doing business with the sponsors. So let's get back to some of the recruitment issues that we face